David ripped my boarding pass in half and threw the pieces at my feet like confetti at the world's most humiliating celebration. "Find your own way home, Margaret." He turned his back and walked toward his gate, leaving me stranded at Cairo International Airport with exactly $23 in my purse and a dying phone battery. As I watched my husband of 30 years disappear into the crowd, a man in an expensive suit approached with a knowing smile. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it? Don't worry, your husband will regret this decision very, very soon. Tell us your city, hit subscribe, and get ready for today's story. Let's start." 3 hours earlier, I'd been Mrs. David Thompson, respected wife of a successful businessman, sitting in first class sipping champagne and believing we were finally taking the romantic getaway that would save our marriage. How naive can a 54-year-old woman be? Apparently, more naive than I'd ever imagined. The fight started over something ridiculous: David's insistence on checking his phone every 5 minutes during what was supposed to be our romantic dinner in Cairo. "Can't the business survive without you for one evening?" I'd asked, not unreasonably. "You have no idea what real pressure looks like." "Margaret." His voice carried that dismissive tone I'd learned to hate over the past 2 years. "While you're playing house and reading your little books, I'm building an empire." Playing house. After 30 years of managing his household, raising his children, and being the perfect corporate wife at every company function, charity gala, and business dinner. After 3 decades of putting his career above my own dreams, his needs above my wants, his reputation above my identity. "I'm tired of being treated like hired help, David." The words came out stronger than I'd intended. "I'm your wife, not your employee." That's when his mask finally slipped completely. "You're whatever I say you are. And right now, you're becoming expensive dead weight." Expensive dead weight. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. This from the man who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. Apparently, he'd forgotten the poorer part applied to respecting me, not just sharing money. "I want to go home," I'd said quietly. "I want to go home and figure out what comes next for us." David laughed. Actually laughed. "Home? You mean my house? The one my family's company pays for? The one where you contribute absolutely nothing except criticism and demands?" The cruelty in his voice was stunning. After everything I'd sacrificed, every dream I'd postponed, every time I'd smiled and played the supporting role while he took center stage, this was how he really saw me. Now, standing in the airport with torn boarding pass pieces around my feet, I understood that our marriage hadn't slowly deteriorated. It had been a carefully constructed lie. David had been planning this moment, this public humiliation, this complete abandonment. The man in the expensive suit was still standing beside me, watching David's retreating figure with interest rather than concern. Up close, I could see he was perhaps 60, silver-haired, and possessed the kind of quiet confidence that comes from serious money. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" I asked, suddenly aware that I was stranded in a foreign country with a stranger who somehow knew my name. "Marcus Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "And no, we haven't met. But I know quite a bit about your situation, Mrs. Thompson. More than you might imagine." "My situation?" I was too exhausted and humiliated to be properly cautious. "You mean the fact that my husband just abandoned me in Egypt without money or a way home?" Marcus smiled, but there was something sharp in his expression. "Oh, that's just the beginning. David's been planning this trip for months, but not for the reasons he told you. He needed you out of the country for exactly 1 week. My blood chilled. "What happens in 1 week? Let's just say your husband has been busy making arrangements that don't include you in his future. But fortunately for you, I've been making some arrangements of my own." Marcus Blackwood owned the kind of car that made other vehicles look like toys, a sleek black Mercedes that whispered through Cairo traffic while I tried to process how my romantic getaway had turned into a nightmare with a mysterious benefactor. "You still haven't told me how you know about my marriage," I said, settling into leather seats that probably cost more than my monthly allowance from David. "And why you're helping a stranger." Marcus glanced at me through the rearview mirror, where I could see his driver's careful eyes. "Let's start with the help part. My hotel has excellent international communication services. You can call your bank, contact your family, figure out your next steps. No strings attached. No strings attached. In my experience, Men like Marcus Blackwood, powerful men with expensive cars and mysterious knowledge about my personal life, always had strings. But I was currently choosing between trusting a stranger and sleeping on airport benches, so the choice wasn't difficult. "The Four Seasons," Marcus announced as we pulled up to a hotel that looked like something from a fairy tale. Golden lights, marble columns, and doormen who probably earned more than I'd spent on groceries in the past year. "I can't afford this," I said automatically. "You're not paying," Marcus replied, stepping out of the car. "Consider it an investment in justice." Justice. The word followed me through the opulent lobby, where Marcus spoke quietly to the desk clerk in what sounded like perfect Arabic. Within minutes, I had a key card to a suite, and Marcus was guiding me to the elevator. "Room 1247, he said, handing me the key. "Dinner at 8 if you'd like company, or room service if you prefer privacy. Either way, we need to talk about what David's doing while he thinks you're stranded and helpless." The suite was larger than our first apartment had been. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Nile, and the bathroom had a bathtub big enough for 3 people. I caught my reflection in the enormous mirror. Disheveled hair, rumpled clothes, eyes red from crying. I looked exactly like what I was, a middle-aged woman whose life had just imploded. But as I started the bath and finally allowed myself to think clearly, something began shifting inside me. David had wanted me to feel helpless, abandoned, desperate. Instead, I felt angry, furious actually. How dare he humiliate me like that? How dare he treat 30 years of marriage like it was meaningless? I called my daughter Emma first. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. "Mom, Dad said you were extending your trip. Having too much fun in Egypt to come home?" "Emma, I need you to listen carefully. Your father left me at the airport, canceled my ticket home. I'm fine. I found help. But I need you to do something for me." Silence. Then, "Mom, that doesn't sound like Dad." "Are you sure there wasn't a misunderstanding?" "A misunderstanding." Of course Emma would defend her father. David had always been the fun parent, the one with money for shopping trips and expensive gifts. I was the one who enforced bedtime and worried about homework. "Honey, there's no misunderstanding. I need you to go to the house and check Dad's office. Look for any legal documents, travel papers, anything that seems unusual. Mom, I can't go through Dad's private papers. That's an invasion of privacy." Privacy. After 30 years of marriage, I was supposed to respect David's privacy while he demolished mine. "Emma, just be careful around your father right now, and don't mention this conversation." After hanging up, I tried my son Jake. The call went straight to voicemail. My family, it seemed, was going to be just as helpful as my husband. At exactly 8 o'clock, I knocked on Marcus's suite door. He answered wearing casual clothes that still managed to look expensive, dark jeans and a white shirt that had definitely been tailored. "Better?" he asked, noticing I'd changed into the one nice outfit I'd packed. "Cleaner, still furious." Marcus laughed. "Good. Anger is much more useful than despair. Shall we eat?" Over room service that was better than most restaurant meals, Marcus began explaining exactly why my husband had brought me to Egypt. "David filed preliminary divorce papers 3 weeks ago," he said casually, cutting into what looked like the most perfect steak I'd ever seen. "His lawyers advised him to establish abandonment as grounds." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Abandonment? If you don't return to the United States within a reasonable time frame, and if there's no evidence you attempted to return, David can claim you abandoned the marriage. It's an old-fashioned approach, but effective. But he canceled my ticket. He left me here." Marcus smiled that sharp smile again. "Can he prove that? His story will be that you had a fight, you said you weren't ready to come home, and he left assuming you'd book your own return flight when you were ready to be reasonable." The piece of beef in my mouth turned to cardboard. David hadn't just humiliated me. He'd set a trap. He'd planned this entire scenario to legally justify stealing everything we'd built together. "How do you know all this?" I asked. Marcus set down his wine glass and studied me carefully. "Because David Thompson has been making some very interesting business decisions lately, the kind that require removing inconvenient people from his life." Inconvenient people? Wives who might ask questions about missing money. Wives who might notice when assets disappear. Wives who might object to their husbands selling everything they own to fund very risky investments. The room started spinning slightly. What investments? Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed me documents I didn't recognize. Bank statements, transfer records, property deeds, all with David's signature, none with mine. Your husband has been liquidating everything he can access without your signature. The vacation home in Aspen, your mother's jewelry, even your children's college funds. Everything's gone, Margaret. I stared at the numbers on the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred to accounts I'd never heard of. That's not possible. I would have known. I would have had to sign. Would you? When's the last time you paid attention to your financial statements? When's the last time David let you handle anything more complicated than grocery money? The truth hit me like ice water. David had been managing our finances for years. I'd trusted him completely, grateful not to worry about investments and accounts and tax implications. I'd been so busy being the perfect wife that I'd handed him complete control of my security. So I really have nothing, I whispered. Marcus leaned forward. Right now, you have nothing. But David made one crucial mistake. What's that? Marcus smiled, and for the first time it looked genuinely warm. He assumed you'd stay helpless. But you're not going to do that, are you, Margaret? For the first time in hours, I smiled back. No, I don't think I am. Marcus spread financial documents across the coffee table like he was dealing cards in the world's highest-stakes poker game. David's been busy, he said, sliding a folder toward me. But he's also been sloppy. Greed makes people careless. I opened the folder and immediately wished I hadn't. Transfer records showing David had moved $200,000 from our joint savings account just 2 weeks before our Egypt trip. That's not possible, I whispered. But the bank letterhead was genuine and the signatures were definitely David's. Here's what's interesting, Marcus continued, pulling out another document. David applied for a business loan using your house as collateral, without your knowledge or signature. Forgery. The word hung between us like a loaded gun. David hadn't just hidden assets from me. He'd committed fraud using my property. Is that legal? Absolutely not. But it takes time to prove fraud, and David's counting on you being too devastated and too broke to fight him in court. He's underestimated you rather dramatically. I studied Marcus's face, looking for any sign that this was some elaborate con. But his documents were too detailed, his knowledge too specific. Either he was the world's most sophisticated scammer, or he really did know exactly what David had been planning. Who are you really? I asked. And why do you care what happens to me? Marcus poured himself more wine and settled back in his chair. I'm someone who doesn't like watching bullies destroy innocent people. And I'm someone with the resources to level playing fields that have been artificially tilted. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you need right now. What matters is that I can help you fight back. If you're interested in fighting. 3 days ago, my biggest concern had been whether David would remember our anniversary next month. Now I was being offered the chance to go to war against the man who'd shared my bed for 3 decades. What kind of fighting? Marcus smiled that dangerous smile. The kind that ensures David gets exactly what he deserves. But first, you need to understand something important about your husband's business. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a news article from the Wall Street Journal. Thompson Industries has been struggling for the past 18 months. Your husband's been hiding significant losses from investors, creditors, and apparently from you. The headline read, "Mid-market manufacturing firms face unprecedented challenges." David's company was mentioned specifically as one of several at risk of bankruptcy. David told me business was better than ever, I said weakly. David's been telling a lot of people a lot of things. The truth is, he needs liquid capital desperately, and your assets are the only thing standing between him and complete financial ruin. I thought about the past 2 years, David's increasing stress, his secretive phone calls, his insistence that I didn't need to worry about money. I'd attributed it to midlife pressure, never imagining he was facing corporate disaster. So divorcing me isn't just about getting rid of an inconvenient wife, I said slowly. It's about survival. Exactly. And here's the beautiful part. David's so focused on stealing your assets that he's made himself incredibly vulnerable. Marcus showed me more documents. Transfer records, loan applications, property filings, all completed without my knowledge or consent, all potentially fraudulent. Every document David signed in your name, every asset he moved without your permission, every lie he told to banks and lawyers. It's all evidence of criminal behavior. He's not just divorcing you, Margaret. He's been systematically defrauding you for months. The scope of David's betrayal was breathtaking. Not just the humiliation at the airport, not just the divorce, but a calculated campaign to steal everything I was legally entitled to. What do you want in return? I asked. Because men like you don't help women like me out of kindness. Marcus laughed. Men like me? Wealthy, powerful men who somehow know everything about my personal finances and legal situation. This isn't charity, Marcus. What do you get out of helping me destroy my husband? For the first time since we'd met, Marcus looked genuinely pleased. Very good. You're going to be much harder to manipulate than David assumed. He walked to the window and looked out over the Nile. What I get is the satisfaction of watching a man who thinks he can steal from his wife face some consequences for his actions. What I get is knowing that David Thompson's arrogance and greed finally caught up with him. That's still not a real answer. Marcus turned back to me. The real answer is that I've been waiting for someone with legal standing to hold David accountable. You're his wife, Margaret. You have rights he's been violating, assets he's been stealing, legal protections he's been ignoring. I can provide evidence and resources, but you're the one with the power to make him pay. And if I say no, if I decide I just want to go home and try to salvage whatever's left of my marriage? Marcus picked up his phone and showed me a text message. The timestamp showed it had arrived 20 minutes ago. This is from a contact at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Your husband arrived on schedule and was met by a woman named Jennifer Calloway. They left together in her car. Jennifer Calloway, David's assistant, the pretty 28-year-old with the MBA, and the way of looking at David like he was some kind of genius. How long has that been going on? I asked, though I already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. According to my sources, about 18 months, which coincidentally is exactly when David started liquidating your assets. 18 months. While I'd been trying to save our marriage, David had been planning to replace me with someone younger, prettier, and apparently more impressed by his business acumen. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not my heart breaking, but something harder and more useful. My tolerance for being treated like a fool. What do you need me to do? I asked. Marcus's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. First, we need to get you home, but not the way David expects. We're going to make a few stops along the way, gather some evidence, and make sure when you walk back into his life, you're holding all the cards. What kind of evidence? Marcus began gathering the documents from the table. The kind that turns hunters into prey, Margaret. The kind that makes bullies realize they've picked the wrong target. I looked out at the Nile, thinking about David probably having dinner with Jennifer right now, celebrating what he thought was his perfect plan to get rid of me. He had no idea I'd found an ally, or that his months of careful manipulation were about to become his legal nightmare. When do we start? I asked. Marcus checked his watch. My plane leaves for London in 6 hours. From there, we'll head to New York, then Dallas. By the time David realizes you're not stranded and helpless in Egypt, you'll be 3 steps ahead of him with evidence he never imagined anyone could obtain. Your plane? Private jet. Much more convenient for transporting sensitive documents and avoiding inconvenient questions from customs officials. For the first time since David had ripped up my boarding pass, I laughed. You know what? David's right about one thing. I have no idea what real pressure looks like, but I'm about to learn. 24 hours later, I was sitting in a Manhattan law office that probably cost more per hour than most people earned per month, watching David's financial crimes unfold across multiple computer screens like a masterclass in white-collar fraud. Your husband's been busy, said Elena Rodriguez, the forensic accountant Marcus had somehow produced overnight. Most men wait until after the divorce to start hiding assets. David's been at it for over a year. Elena's spreadsheets told a story that made my stomach clench. The vacation house in Aspen, sold 6 months ago. Proceeds transferred to an account I'd never heard of. My grandmother's antique jewelry, liquidated through an estate sale company, again without my knowledge. Even the life insurance policy David had insisted we needed, canceled and cashed out just 3 weeks before our Egypt trip. The timing is crucial, Elena explained, highlighting dates on her timeline. Every major asset transfer corresponds to documented business losses at Thompson Industries. David wasn't just planning to leave you. He was using your property to cover his company's debts. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking satisfied, which makes this fraud instead of just marital misconduct. Fraud has criminal implications. Criminal implications. My husband of 30 years wasn't just cheating, he was facing potential federal charges. How much is gone? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Elena consulted her notes. Direct asset liquidation totals approximately $340,000. Fraudulent loans using your property as collateral at another $180,000. Your children's college funds, $95,000 combined. Over $500,000. David had systematically stolen everything he could access while I'd been worried about our marriage counseling appointments. But here's the interesting part, Elena continued. David made one crucial mistake. He assumed you'd never hire professional help to trace these transactions. She pulled up bank records on her computer. Every transfer, every sale, every fraudulent loan application leaves electronic footprints. David was careful about hiding things from you, but he wasn't careful about hiding them from investigators. Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. David's operating under the assumption that you're too trusting, too dependent, and too emotionally devastated to fight back effectively. He's about to learn how wrong he is. What's our next step? I asked, surprised by how easily the word "our" had come out. We go home, Marcus said. But we don't tell David you're coming. Instead, we let him continue thinking his plan worked perfectly while we gather the evidence that's going to destroy him. Elena handed me a thick folder. Everything you need to file criminal fraud charges, civil asset recovery claims, and divorce proceedings that will leave David with nothing except legal bills and federal investigators. I flipped through the documents, seeing my marriage reduced to evidence of systematic theft, 30 years of shared life reduced to spreadsheets and legal exhibits. Elena, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. Could I have prevented this? Are there signs I should have seen? Elena exchanged glances with Marcus before answering. Margaret, financial abuse in marriages is more common than most people realize. The signs are often subtle: gradual exclusion from financial decisions, insistence on handling everything to reduce your stress, creating situations where you're grateful not to worry about money. David always said he was protecting me from financial stress, I admitted. Which is exactly how abusers frame control. They convince you that dependency is protection, that ignorance is bliss. By the time you realize what's happening, they've already gained complete control over your security. I thought about the past few years, how relieved I'd been when David insisted on managing our investments, how grateful I'd felt when he told me not to worry about college funding or retirement planning. I'd thought it was love. It had actually been manipulation. The important thing, Marcus said, is that David severely underestimated your ability to fight back. He expected you to come home desperate and willing to accept whatever crumbs he offered in a settlement. Instead, Marcus smiled that dangerous smile. Instead, you're going to walk into his life holding documentation of every crime he's committed, evidence of every asset he's stolen, and legal representation that's going to make his most expensive nightmares look affordable. That afternoon, we flew from New York to Dallas on Marcus's private jet. I'd never been on a plane that had bedrooms and a conference table, never traveled with someone who casually ordered gourmet meals at 30,000 feet. Can I ask you something? I said, as we flew over the Midwest. You've been very patient about not asking questions, Marcus replied. Fire away. How did you know David would abandon me in Egypt? How did you know to be at that exact airport at that exact time? Marcus was quiet for so long, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, because I've been watching David Thompson for 6 months, Margaret, waiting for him to make the kind of mistake that would give someone legal standing to hold him accountable. What kind of mistake? The kind where he commits multiple felonies against someone who has the right to prosecute him for those felonies. David's been stealing from investors and creditors for over a year, but corporate fraud is hard to prove and expensive to prosecute. Defrauding your spouse, on the other hand, that's personal, traceable, and prosecutable. I stared at him. You've been using me as bait. I've been waiting for David to hand you the evidence you'd need to destroy him. There's a difference. Is there? Marcus met my gaze steadily. You're not a victim anymore, Margaret. You're a woman with $500,000 in documented theft claims, criminal fraud evidence, and the legal right to take everything David has left. The question is, what are you going to do with that power? As we began our descent into Dallas, I could see the city where I'd lived for 30 years, where I'd raised my children and built what I'd thought was a secure life. Somewhere down there, David was probably having dinner with Jennifer, confident that his inconvenient wife was stranded and helpless half a world away. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. "Marcus," I said as the plane touched down, "when this is over, when David's facing the consequences of everything he's done, what happens to you?" "I disappear," he said simply, just like I was never here. "But the evidence, the legal help, the plane, will all be attributed to the excellent legal team you hired with your own money. Money that David thought he'd stolen, but that was actually being held in trust by investigators building a case against him." I didn't understand what he meant, but I was beginning to realize that Marcus Blackwood operated in a world where explanations were less important than results. "Are you ready?" he asked as we prepared to disembark. I thought about David at home, probably congratulating himself on how perfectly his plan had worked. I thought about Jennifer, enjoying what she thought was her victory over the inconvenient older wife. I thought about 30 years of marriage that had been slowly transformed into an elaborate con game. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's go ruin David's life." I stood outside my own house at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, watching my husband load suitcases into Jennifer Calloway's car while she waited in the driver's seat wearing what looked suspiciously like my missing diamond earrings. David had no idea I was home, as far as he knew. I was still stranded in Egypt, probably crying in some budget hotel room, and begging the embassy to help me get home. The look of pure contentment on his face as he kissed his young assistant goodbye made me want to march across the lawn and slap them both. Instead, I waited until Jennifer's car disappeared around the corner, then walked up to the front door of the house David thought he'd already stolen from me. My key still worked. Apparently, David hadn't expected me to need it. I stepped inside and immediately noticed changes. The family photos from our mantel were gone, replaced by expensive-looking art I'd never seen before. My grandmother's china cabinet, the one I'd inherited and cherished for 15 years, was completely empty. "David!" I called out, setting my purse on the hall table like I'd done thousands of times before. The sound of footsteps upstairs, then David's voice floating down. "Jennifer, did you forget something?" He appeared at the top of the stairs and froze when he saw me. For a moment, his face showed pure panic, the look of a man whose carefully constructed lies had just collapsed around him. "Margaret." He recovered quickly, switching to his practiced, concerned husband expression. "Thank God you're safe. I've been worried sick. When you didn't call, when you didn't try to come home. Cut the performance." "David," I said, settling into the living room chair that had apparently survived his asset liquidation. "I know about Jennifer. I know about the money. I know about all of it." David walked slowly down the stairs, and I could practically see him calculating his next move. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know you've stolen over $500,000 from me. I know you've been planning this divorce for months. I know you brought me to Egypt specifically to abandon me there and establish grounds for claiming I'd left you." His face went pale. "That's ridiculous. You're obviously upset and confused." "I'm upset." "Yes. Confused? Not anymore." I pulled Elena's folder from my purse and set it on the coffee table. "Forensic accounting is fascinating, David. Did you know that every electronic transfer leaves a permanent record? Every loan application, every property sale, every fraudulent signature?" David stared at the folder like it might contain a bomb. "Margaret, I think you need to calm down and think about this rationally." "I am thinking rationally. For the first time in years, actually. I'm thinking about how you've systematically stolen everything I own while convincing me it was for my own protection. I'm thinking about how you've been planning to throw away 30 years of marriage for a woman young enough to be our daughter. I'm thinking about federal fraud charges, David." The word federal hit him like a physical blow. He sank into the opposite chair, his practiced composure finally cracking. "It's not what you think," he said weakly. "Really? Then explain the $200,000 you transferred from our savings account. Explain selling our vacation home without my knowledge or signature. Explain liquidating the children's college funds to cover your business losses." David's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. The business was in trouble. I was trying to save everything we'd built. By stealing everything I'd built? David, our house is mortgaged to pay your business debts. My grandmother's jewelry was sold to cover your losses. You've been using my assets to subsidize your failures while planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. That wasn't the plan. That was exactly the plan. And it might have worked if you hadn't underestimated me so completely. I opened Elena's folder and spread the financial documents across the coffee table. Every transaction is documented, David. Every forged signature, every fraudulent loan application, every asset you've stolen. Your lawyers can explain why none of this constitutes criminal behavior. David stared at the evidence of his crimes spread across our coffee table like a hand of cards that had just lost him everything. What do you want? He asked finally. I want everything you've stolen returned immediately. I want our house removed from your business debt obligations. I want my name off every fraudulent document you've signed. And I want you to explain to our children why their college funds disappeared. And if I do all that? I smiled, thinking about how Marcus had looked when he'd promised David would regret abandoning me. Then maybe we can discuss a civilized divorce instead of criminal prosecution. David was quiet for a long time, studying the documents that proved his months of careful manipulation had been a complete waste of time. How did you... He stopped, shook his head. How did you find out about all this? Does it matter? What matters is that your plan failed spectacularly. Instead of being stranded and helpless in Egypt, I spent the last 3 days working with forensic accountants and criminal attorneys. Instead of begging you to take me back, I'm offering you the chance to return what you've stolen before this becomes a federal case. Margaret, you have to understand, I understand perfectly. You decided I was expensive dead weight and developed an elaborate plan to get rid of me while keeping everything I was legally entitled to. You brought me to Egypt, specifically to abandon me there. You've been stealing from me for over a year while pretending it was for my protection. I stood up and walked to where David was sitting. But here's what you didn't understand. I'm not the helpless woman you've been treating like a child. I'm your wife, which means I have legal rights you've been violating and assets you've been stealing. And now I have evidence. David looked up at me with something that might have been respect if it hadn't been mixed with so much fear. What happens now? He asked. I walked to the mantel where our family photos used to sit. Now you have 24 hours to begin returning everything you've stolen. Your lawyer can contact my lawyer with a proposed timeline for asset restoration. Your lawyer? I pulled a business card from my purse and set it on the coffee table. Marcus Chen, Ellis & Associates. He's been handling white-collar crime cases for 15 years. He's very good at what he does. David picked up the card with shaking hands. And if I refuse? Then Elena Rodriguez's forensic accounting report gets forwarded to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, along with documentation of everything you've stolen and every fraudulent document you've signed. I walked toward the door, then turned back to look at the man I'd been married to for 30 years. You were right about one thing, David. I didn't know what real pressure looked like, but I'm learning fast. As I reached the door, David called out, Margaret, wait. I need to know. Who helped you? How did you manage all this? I smiled, thinking about Marcus and his mysterious resources, his perfect timing, his promise that David would regret his arrogance. I managed it the same way you managed to steal $500,000 from me, David. Very carefully, with excellent professional help, and with more intelligence than you gave me credit for. I closed the door behind me and walked to the rental car I'd parked down the street. In 24 hours, David would either begin the process of returning everything he'd stolen, or he'd learn exactly what federal prosecutors do to men who commit financial fraud against their wives. Either way, his plan to leave me stranded and helpless had backfired more completely than he could have ever imagined. As I drove away from the house, David thought he'd already stolen from me. My phone rang. Marcus. How did it go? He asked. David looked like a man who'd just realized he'd been playing chess against someone who knew all his moves before he made them. Marcus laughed. Perfect. Are you ready for the next phase? What's the next phase? Making sure David understands that returning your assets isn't enough, that he's going to face consequences for every crime he's committed, every law he's broken, every way he's underestimated you. I thought about David sitting in our living room, staring at evidence of his own criminal behavior, finally understanding that his inconvenient wife wasn't as helpless as he'd assumed. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's finish this." 24 hours after I'd given David his ultimatum, Jennifer Calloway was sitting in my living room, crying into my grandmother's lace handkerchief, while David paced behind her like a caged animal. "I had no idea," she sobbed for the third time. "I swear to you, Mrs. Thompson, I never knew David was stealing from you." I studied the young woman who'd been wearing my diamond earrings just yesterday, noting how genuinely shocked she seemed to be learning about David's financial crimes. "Jennifer," I said gently, "when did David tell you our marriage was over?" 6 months ago. He said you'd grown apart, that you were planning to divorce, but wanted to wait until after your anniversary to make it official. 6 months ago. Exactly when David had started liquidating our assets most aggressively. David stopped pacing. "Margaret, I know this looks bad. It looks exactly like what it is. David. Fraud, theft, and adultery. Though I'm starting to think Jennifer here is as much a victim as I am." Jennifer looked up hopefully. "I really didn't know about the money, Mrs. Thompson. David told me he was supporting you financially during the separation, that you'd agreed to everything." I pulled out Elena's financial records and spread them on the coffee table where Jennifer could see them. "David, show her the college fund statements. Show her what happened to our children's education money." David's face went pale. "Margaret, don't drag Jennifer into this." "I'm not dragging her anywhere. I'm showing her exactly who she's been sleeping with." I turned to Jennifer. "Sweetheart, look at these transfer dates. Every time David took you somewhere expensive, every time he bought you jewelry or paid for romantic weekends, that money came from accounts he'd stolen from." Jennifer studied the documents, and I watched her expression change from confusion to horror to rage. "The Napa Valley trip," she whispered. "The diamond bracelet. The down payment on my new car. All funded by theft," I confirmed. "David's been using you as motivation to steal more efficiently." Jennifer turned to David with fury I recognized from my own mirror. "You told me that money came from your business profits. You said you were doing well." David sat down heavily, looking like a man who'd finally run out of lies. "Jen, I can explain." "With what? More lies?" Jennifer stood up, her tears replaced by cold anger. "You made me an accessory to stealing from your wife. Do you understand what that means for my career? For my reputation?" I almost felt sorry for David. He'd manipulated 2 women simultaneously, and now both of us were angry, educated, and holding evidence of his crimes. "Jennifer," I said quietly, "David applied for loans using forged documents with my signature. If you unknowingly benefited from those stolen funds, you could be considered an unwitting accomplice." The color drained from Jennifer's face. "What kind of legal trouble am I in?" "That depends entirely on what you do next." David looked between us desperately. "Margaret, please. We can work this out. I'll return everything, pay back every penny." "With what money, David? Your business is failing. Your personal accounts are empty. You've already spent most of what you stole." Jennifer pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer. I need to understand my legal exposure before this gets worse." As she stepped into the kitchen to make her call, David moved closer to me. "Margaret, you have to understand. I was trying to save the business, save our future. By stealing my future? David, you liquidated my grandmother's jewelry to pay your gambling debts." His face froze. "How do you know about the gambling, about the loan sharks, about the fact that you've been betting our assets at high-stakes poker games for the past year?" I smiled, thinking about how thorough Elena's investigation had been. "I know everything, David. Every debt, every lie, every desperate scheme you've concocted." David sank back into his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "The business was supposed to recover. I just needed time. Time you planned to buy by stealing everything I owned and abandoning me in Egypt?" Jennifer returned from the kitchen, her expression grim. "My lawyer says I need to cooperate fully with authorities and return anything I can prove came from stolen funds." She pulled the diamond bracelet from her wrist and set it on the coffee table. "This was a gift from David 3 weeks ago. If it came from money stolen from you, I want it returned." I picked up the bracelet, a delicate piece I'd never seen before, clearly expensive, definitely not something David could have afforded legitimately. "Keep it," I said, handing it back to her. "But Jennifer, I need you to understand something important. David didn't just steal money from me. He orchestrated an elaborate plan to humiliate and abandon me while convincing you that I was the obstacle to your happiness. Jennifer's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean David brought me to Egypt specifically to create grounds for divorce. He planned to leave me stranded there while he established abandonment as legal cause for taking everything I owned. Jennifer turned to David with disgust. You planned all of this? The trip? The fight? Leaving her at the airport? It was all calculated? David's silence was answer enough. You're not just a thief, Jennifer said quietly. You're a sociopath. My phone rang. Marcus. Margaret, we need to meet. Something's happened that changes everything. What kind of something? The kind that makes David's theft look like a parking violation. Can you get away from the house? I looked at David, slumped in defeat, and Jennifer, studying legal documents with the intensity of someone whose life had just exploded. I can be free in 10 minutes. Good. And Margaret? Bring any evidence David might have given you about his business partners. We're about to discover that your husband's crimes are much larger than either of us realized. Marcus's hotel suite had been transformed into what looked like a war room. Computers, financial documents, and photographs spread across every surface. David Thompson isn't just a failing businessman who stole from his wife, Marcus announced as I set down the briefcase David had reluctantly handed over. He's been laundering money for some very dangerous people. The photographs on his table showed David meeting with men I'd never seen before, shaking hands in parking garages and remote restaurants like scenes from a crime movie. Money laundering? I sat down heavily, trying to process how my ordinary husband had become involved in organized crime. Thompson Industries has been washing cash through legitimate contracts for the past 18 months. Construction projects that don't exist, equipment purchases that never happen, labor costs for workers who aren't real. Marcus showed me financial records that made David's theft from me look small. Millions of dollars flowing through his business accounts, legitimate on paper but completely fabricated in reality. Who are these people? I asked, studying the surveillance photos. Let's just say they're the kind of businessmen who don't accept excuses when their money goes missing. And David's been skimming from their operations to cover his gambling losses. My blood went cold. How much has he stolen from them? Based on what we can trace, approximately $2.3 million over the past 6 months. I stared at the documents, understanding for the first time why David had been so desperate, so reckless, so willing to destroy our marriage for quick cash. Marcus, if these people discover what David's done, they already know. That's why we're having this conversation. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a text message from an unknown number, sent to David's phone just 2 hours ago. Thompson, Friday midnight, warehouse district, come alone, bring our money. David received this while you were confronting him at the house. He thinks you don't know about his business problems, but he's about to discover that stealing from his wife is the least of his concerns. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Are you saying David's in actual physical danger? I'm saying David's business partners don't use lawyers when someone steals their money. They use more direct methods of debt collection. Marcus walked to the window and looked out over Dallas. This creates an interesting moral dilemma for you. Margaret, David has been stealing from you, lying to you, and planning to abandon you. But he's also about to face consequences that are significantly more severe than divorce court. What kind of consequences? The kind that end careers, reputations, and sometimes lives. I studied the surveillance photos again, noting the expensive cars, the serious faces, the general air of men who took their business very seriously. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course. How did you know to be at that airport in Cairo? How did you know David would abandon me there? How did you know about his gambling? His business problems? His money laundering? Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying my face like he was deciding whether to trust me with something important. Because I've been investigating David's business partners for 8 months, the money laundering, the illegal contracts, the whole operation. David wasn't our primary target. He was just a convenient way to access their financial records. My mind reeled. You're law enforcement. I'm someone who specializes in dismantling criminal organizations that think they're too clever to get caught. David's theft from you, provided the perfect opportunity to flip him as an informant against his business partners. Flip him how? Marcus smiled grimly. By offering him federal protection in exchange for testimony against the people who've been using his business to launder money. It's either cooperate with us or face his Friday night appointment alone. I thought about David at home, probably preparing for what he believed would be a simple negotiation with angry business partners. He had no idea he was walking into a situation that could result in federal charges or worse. What happens if David refuses to cooperate? Then he meets with his business partners Friday night without federal protection, tries to explain why their money is missing, and hopes they're more forgiving than their reputation suggests. And what happens if he does cooperate? Then he provides evidence that dismantles a money laundering operation that's been moving millions through Dallas businesses. His business partners go to federal prison, and David gets a new identity in witness protection. Witness protection. The phrase hung between us like a death sentence for any possibility of normal justice. Margaret, I need to know what you want to happen here. David has committed serious crimes against you, but he's also stumbled into something much larger and more dangerous than marriage fraud. I walked to the window and looked out at the city where I'd lived my entire adult life. Somewhere out there, David was probably trying to figure out how to convince dangerous criminals not to kill him. Somewhere else, Jennifer was probably wondering how her promising career had become entangled with federal investigations. If David enters witness protection, what happens to the money he stole from me? Federal asset forfeiture recovers everything traceable to criminal activity. You'd get back significantly more than David originally stole, because his business partner's assets get liquidated as well. And David disappears forever. New name, new location, new life. You'd never see him again, but you'd be completely free of him legally and financially. I thought about 30 years of marriage, about the man I'd thought I'd known, about the elaborate criminal enterprise he'd apparently been operating while I worried about our romantic dinners. Marcus, when you were waiting for David to make a mistake that would give you leverage over him, did you know he was planning to abandon me in Egypt? We knew he was planning something drastic to solve his financial problems. The Egypt trip provided the perfect opportunity to catch him in the act. So you used me as bait. Marcus met my eyes directly. Yes, but Margaret, you should know that even without our investigation, David's business partners would have eventually discovered his theft. We didn't create this situation. We just provided you with the opportunity to survive it. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Margaret, we need to talk. Something's happened. Can you come home? I showed the message to Marcus. He's received the midnight meeting message, Marcus said. Now he has to decide whether to trust you with the truth about his business or face Friday night alone. What do you recommend I do? Marcus handed me a small recording device. Go home. Let David explain his situation. Get him to admit everything on tape. Then give him our phone number and let him choose his own ending. As I prepared to leave, Marcus caught my arm gently. Margaret, whatever David chooses, your part in this is almost over. By Monday morning, you'll either be a wealthy widow with a federal protection detail or a wealthy divorcee with evidence that puts your husband in witness protection. And what about justice? What about David facing consequences for what he's done to me? Marcus smiled that sharp smile one last time. Trust me, whatever David faces next will be far worse than anything divorce court could have delivered. David was waiting in our kitchen with a bottle of scotch and the look of a man who'd just realized his house was on fire with no way out. Margaret, sit down. We need to discuss some complications that have developed. I poured myself wine instead of sharing his scotch, noting how his hands shook as he refilled his glass for what was probably not the first time that evening. What kind of complications, David? The business has some partnerships that I haven't told you about. Financial arrangements that have become problematic. David was trying to ease into confessing to money laundering like it was a minor accounting error. How problematic? I asked, settling into the chair across from him. David loosened his tie and ran his hand through his hair. Margaret, some of the investors in Thompson Industries aren't traditional business people. They have expectations about returns that are inflexible. You mean they're criminals, David? His glass froze halfway to his mouth. What do you know? I know you've been laundering money through fake contracts. I know you've been skimming from their operations to cover your gambling debts. I know they've discovered what you've done and scheduled a meeting for Friday night. David stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. That's impossible. No one knows about the business arrangements except the federal agents who've been investigating your money laundering operation for 8 months. The blood drained from David's face. Federal agents? I pulled out my phone and showed him the recording app that was already running. David, I need you to tell me everything. Every detail about your business partners, every illegal transaction, every crime you've committed. Because right now, complete honesty is the only thing that might save your life. David's scotch glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. Amber liquid spreading across the tiles like spilled evidence. Margaret, if you know about Friday night, then you know these aren't people who negotiate. They expect their money returned, or they collect it in other ways. How much do you owe them? $2.3 million. But it's not just debt, Margaret. It's money I was supposed to wash clean through the business. Money that belongs to people who don't accept apologies. David stood up and began pacing, stepping around the broken glass like he was avoiding landmines. I never meant for it to go this far. The gambling started small, just weekend poker games with successful businessmen. But the stakes kept increasing, and my luck kept getting worse. So you started stealing from me to cover your losses. I started borrowing against our assets, planning to replace everything once my luck turned. But then the poker games became introduction to other opportunities. Business investments that required discretion. Money laundering. Financial consulting for clients who preferred privacy. It was supposed to be temporary, just until Thompson Industries recovered. I watched my husband of 30 years explain how he'd gradually transformed from a struggling businessman into a money launderer, each step seeming reasonable until he was trapped in criminal enterprise. David, how long have you known these people would kill you if they discovered your theft? His pacing stopped. 6 months, maybe longer. Margaret, these aren't white-collar criminals who file lawsuits. They're people who make problems disappear permanently. And you brought me to Egypt anyway. You planned to abandon me there while knowing you might not survive the next week. David slumped against the kitchen counter. I thought if I could access your inheritance, liquidate your assets, I could pay them back and end this nightmare. Egypt was supposed to give me legal grounds to claim everything quickly, by leaving me stranded in a foreign country. I thought you'd find a way home eventually. I thought once the divorce was final, once I had access to your money, I could fix everything and we could both move on with our lives. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. David had been willing to destroy my life to save his own, banking on my resourcefulness to survive his abandonment. David, the federal agents who've been investigating your business partners want to make you a deal. His head snapped up. What kind of deal? I pulled Marcus's business card from my purse and set it on the counter. Full cooperation in exchange for witness protection. You provide evidence that dismantles their operation. They provide you with a new identity and federal protection. David picked up the card with trembling fingers. Witness protection means you disappear forever. New name, new location, new life. It also means I get everything back that you stole, plus assets seized from your business partners. And if I refuse? Then you face Friday night alone and hope your business partners are more understanding than their reputation suggests. David walked to the kitchen window and stared out at the backyard where we'd hosted barbecues and birthday parties for 30 years. Margaret, if I do this, if I enter witness protection, you'll never see me again. Our marriage, our life together, everything just ends. David, our marriage ended the moment you decided I was expensive dead weight worth abandoning in Egypt. This is just paperwork. He turned back to me, and for the first time in months, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse. I know you'll never forgive me for what I've done, but Margaret, I need you to understand. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so desperate, so afraid of losing everything. You were afraid of losing everything, so you decided to steal everything I had instead. David nodded, tears starting to flow down his cheeks. I made terrible choices. Choices that hurt you, endangered you, destroyed everything we built together. I studied the man I'd been married to for 3 decades, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the successful businessman I'd admired, not the romantic husband I'd tried to save, but a weak, frightened man who'd chosen to sacrifice everyone around him rather than face his own failures. David, call the number on that card. Tell them you're ready to make a deal. Because Friday night is coming, whether you're prepared or not. As David reached for his phone to call Marcus, I realized that one way or another, my marriage to David Thompson would be over by the weekend. The only question was whether he'd survive long enough to start his new life, or whether his business partners would ensure he never needed a new identity. Either way, I was finally going to be free. Marcus wasn't who I thought he was, and David Thompson wasn't who anyone thought he was. The truth came crashing down Tuesday morning when FBI agent Sarah Chen showed up at my door with a badge, a search warrant, and information that made my head spin like a carnival ride. Mrs. Thompson, we need to discuss your husband's testimony and your own potential involvement in his money laundering operation. She settled into my living room like she owned it, spreading documents across my coffee table with practiced efficiency. My involvement? I stared at the woman who somehow looked exactly like the federal agent I'd imagine Marcus would be if he weren't pretending to be a mysterious businessman. Agent Chen, I'm the victim here. David stole from me. That's what we initially believed. But David's testimony yesterday revealed some interesting details about your marriage that we need to clarify. Agent Chen pulled out a digital recorder and placed it on the table between us. Mrs. Thompson, did you know that David had been laundering money through Thompson Industries? Not until yesterday. When I discovered, did you know that several of the properties David liquidated, including your vacation home in Aspen, were purchased using laundered money? My blood chilled. That's impossible. We bought that house 12 years ago with money from a construction contract that Thompson Industries never actually completed. The house, the jewelry, even your children's college funds. All of it was purchased using money that had been washed through David's business. The room started spinning. Are you saying that everything David stole from me was already stolen money? We're saying that David Thompson has been a money laundering operation disguised as a legitimate business for over 15 years. The personal assets he liquidated weren't legally his to sell because they were purchased with criminal proceeds. Agent Chen showed me financial records that went back to the early years of our marriage. Contract payments from companies that didn't exist, construction projects that were never built, labor costs for workers who weren't real. Mrs. Thompson, you've been living on laundered money for most of your marriage. Your house, your cars, your lifestyle, all of it was funded by criminal activity. I felt like I was drowning in information that rewrote my entire adult life, but I didn't know. I never knew where the money came from. David handled all the finances. Which brings us to the central question. Are you an unknowing victim of your husband's crimes? Or were you a knowing participant who's now claiming ignorance to avoid prosecution? The words hit me like ice water. You think I was part of David's money laundering? We think that after 15 years of marriage to a money launderer, it would be remarkable if you never noticed anything suspicious. No questions about sudden windfalls, unusual business trips, meetings with clients who paid in cash. I tried to think back over the years, searching for signs I should have recognized. David's secretive phone calls, his insistence on handling all financial matters, his reluctance to discuss business details. Agent Chen, I trusted my husband completely. When he said business was good, I believed him. When he said he was protecting me from financial stress, I was grateful. Even when he started gambling heavily, even when he became secretive about money, even when expensive purchases appeared without explanation, the truth was uncomfortable. I had noticed things, but I'd chosen not to ask questions. David's success had provided security, and I'd been content to enjoy the benefits without examining the source. You're right, I admitted. I should have asked more questions, but willful ignorance isn't the same as criminal participation. Agent Chen leaned forward. That's exactly what we need to determine, because if you were genuinely ignorant of David's activities, you're a victim entitled to protection and asset recovery. But if you knowingly benefited from criminal activity while maintaining plausible deniability, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the implications perfectly. What do you need me to do to prove I wasn't involved? Complete financial transparency, full cooperation with our investigation, and most importantly, help us understand how David's operation really worked. Agent Chen pulled out photographs of David meeting with men I recognized from Marcus's surveillance photos. These are David's business partners. We need to know if you ever met any of them, if David ever mentioned them, if you ever noticed anything about his relationship with them. I studied the photos carefully. I've never seen any of these men before yesterday. Yesterday? When the man I thought was Marcus Blackwood, showed me surveillance photos of David's meetings. Agent Chen's expression sharpened. Mrs. Thompson, there is no Marcus Blackwood. The man who helped you in Cairo was Agent Martinez from our organized crime division. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Marcus hadn't been a mysterious benefactor. He'd been a federal agent running an undercover operation. Agent Martinez has been investigating David's money laundering for 8 months. When David brought you to Egypt, it provided the perfect opportunity to approach you as a potential witness. So everything Marcus told me was true, but he wasn't who he said he was. Agent Martinez told you exactly what you needed to know to cooperate with our investigation. The Egypt operation was designed to catch David in the act of defrauding you while building our case against his business partners. I thought about the past week, the mysterious rescuer in Cairo, the forensic accountant in New York, the private jet, the elegant hotel suites. All of it had been an elaborate federal operation. Agent Chen, what happens now? To David, to me, to the money. David enters witness protection next week. His testimony will put 6 people in federal prison for money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. As for you, she paused, studying my face carefully. That depends entirely on whether we believe you're telling the truth about your ignorance of David's activities. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Blackwood, but I now knew it was actually Agent Martinez. Answer it, Agent Chen instructed. But remember that this conversation is being recorded. I picked up the phone. Hello, Marcus, or should I say, Agent Martinez? His familiar laugh came through the speaker. I was wondering when you'd figure that out. Are you ready to learn the rest of the story? Margaret? Because we're just getting to the interesting part. Agent Martinez walked into my living room without the expensive suits or mysterious air that had defined Marcus Blackwood. But his smile was exactly the same, sharp, knowing, and slightly dangerous. Margaret, you've been remarkable throughout this entire operation. Most people don't handle the discovery that their entire life was funded by criminal activity quite so well. He settled into the chair where David used to sit, looking satisfied with how everything had played out. But there's one final piece of this story that I think you'll find particularly interesting. Agent Chen opened a laptop and turned it toward me. Mrs. Thompson, David's cooperation has revealed something unexpected about his money laundering operation. It wasn't just washing money for organized crime. It was washing money stolen from federal investigations. The screen showed financial records that made my head spin. Millions of dollars flowing through David's business accounts. But these weren't random criminal proceeds. For the past 3 years, David has been laundering money that was stolen from FBI asset seizure accounts. Money that was supposed to be returned to victims of financial crimes. I stared at the numbers, trying to process what they were telling me. You mean David was stealing money that belonged to people like me? Exactly like you. Victims of fraud, elderly people whose assets had been stolen, families who'd lost everything to financial predators. David was washing the money that was supposed to compensate them for their losses. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Margaret, your husband wasn't just a criminal. He was stealing from federal programs designed to help crime victims, including programs that had specifically allocated funds for cases exactly like yours. My mind reeled. Are you saying that David was stealing money that might have helped other women in my situation? We're saying David was stealing money that was definitely allocated to help women in your exact situation. The Federal Victim Compensation Fund has been hemorrhaging money for 3 years, and we couldn't figure out where it was going. Agent Chen showed me more documents. The vacation home David liquidated? It was purchased with money stolen from a victim compensation account for elderly fraud victims. Your grandmother's jewelry was sold to fund operations that were stealing money from programs designed to help grandmothers just like her. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. David had been financing our lifestyle with money stolen from people who were exactly like me, victims of financial abuse who deserved justice and compensation. Agent Martinez, when you approached me in Cairo, did you already know about this? We knew David was connected to the missing victim compensation funds, but we didn't know how deep the operation went. Your situation provided the perfect opportunity to trace the money back to its source. And now? Agent Martinez smiled that familiar sharp smile. Now we've recovered $47 million in stolen victim compensation funds. Money that was supposed to help crime victims rebuild their lives. Agent Chen pulled out a check and set it on the coffee table. Mrs. Thompson, this is your share of the recovered assets. Not just what David stole from you, but your portion of the victim compensation fund that should have been available to you 3 years ago. I picked up the check and stared at the amount. $2.3 million. This is more than David stole from me. Much more. The Victim Compensation Fund calculates awards based on the full impact of financial crimes, including lost investment opportunities, emotional damages, and punitive compensation for particularly egregious cases. Agent Martinez stood and walked to the window. Margaret, David's testimony has dismantled one of the largest money laundering operations we've investigated. His business partners are facing federal charges that will put them in prison for decades. And David is beginning his new life in witness protection as we speak. He'll spend the rest of his days in a small town in Montana, working as a bookkeeper under an assumed name. No gambling, no business partnerships, no contact with anyone from his previous life. I thought about David in some anonymous Midwestern town, filling out spreadsheets and living alone in a tiny apartment, completely cut off from everything he'd ever known. Agent Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were investigating whether I was involved in David's crimes, did you really think I was part of the money laundering? Agent Chen and Agent Martinez exchanged glances. Honestly? For about 6 hours. But Margaret, the profile of someone who knowingly participates in money laundering doesn't match your behavior at all. You were too genuinely shocked, too authentically angry, too completely unprepared for any of this. Agent Martinez sat back down. Plus, real criminals don't usually cooperate as completely as you have. They lawyer up immediately and claim to know nothing about anything. So I passed your test? You passed every test. You're exactly what you appear to be. A woman who trusted the wrong man and paid a terrible price for that trust. Agent Chen began gathering her documents. Mrs. Thompson, there's one last thing you should know. David's money laundering operation wasn't just stealing from victim compensation funds. It was specifically targeting cases involving financial abuse of women. My blood chilled. What do you mean? I mean, David was stealing money allocated to help women whose husbands had defrauded them, abandoned them, or financially abused them. Women whose situations were identical to yours. The full scope of David's betrayal finally hit me. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd been stealing from federal programs designed to help women exactly like me, while simultaneously planning to make me need those same programs. Agent Martinez, that night in Cairo when you promised David would regret abandoning me, you already knew about this, didn't you? Agent Martinez's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Margaret, I knew that David Thompson was about to discover that karma is a federal investigator with a badge and unlimited patience. As the agents prepared to leave, Agent Chen handed me a business card. Mrs. Thompson, you'll need to testify at David's business partner's trials, but after that, your involvement in this case is officially over. And then? Then you're a millionaire with a remarkable story about how the worst betrayal of your life led to justice for dozens of other victims. After they left, I sat in my living room now, in my house, furnished with my possessions, paid for with my money, and tried to process everything that had happened. A week ago, I'd been Mrs. David Thompson, abandoned wife with no money and no options. Today, I was Margaret Thompson, federal witness with $2.3 million and a story that would help prosecutors put away criminals who preyed on vulnerable women. My phone rang. Emma, my daughter. Mom, Dad's lawyer called. He said Dad is entering some kind of federal protection program and we might not see him again. What's happening? I looked out at the Dallas skyline, thinking about David in his new life, Agent Martinez back to whatever case came next, and the dozens of women who would receive compensation because their stolen funds had finally been recovered. Emma, your father made some very bad choices that hurt a lot of people, but those choices led to justice for victims who deserved help, including your mother. Are you okay, Mom? Really okay? For the first time in years, I answered that question with complete honesty. Sweetheart, I'm better than okay. I'm free. As I hung up the phone, I realized that David had been right about one thing. I really hadn't known what pressure looked like, but I'd learned, and I'd discovered that I was much stronger under pressure than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. The woman who'd been abandoned at Cairo airport was gone. In her place was someone who'd helped bring down a criminal operation and ensured that other women would receive the justice they deserved. David had wanted to leave me with nothing. Instead, he'd given me everything I needed to become exactly who I was meant to be. A woman who couldn't be underestimated, manipulated, or abandoned. And that, I thought, as I poured myself a glass of wine in my own house, was the best revenge of all.